Hello, everybody, and welcome to Every Movie Ever. I'm your host, Eric, and this is, of course, the show where we are trying to watch and review every movie ever made. And we're going to start off this week with Rockstar. This is the one where Marky Mark plays a regular Joe who is the lead singer of a cover band, who then gets hired to be the lead singer of the real band that his band covers. His girlfriend in the movie is played by Jennifer Aniston, and this is a pretty meh movie. It is, believe it or not, based on a true-ish story about the real-life band Judas Priest, who, upon firing their lead singer, did hire a new lead singer from a Judas Priest cover band. This movie it's watchable, and that's about it. It's okay. The music isn't particularly memorable. They don't do a lot with the story. It is, in the annals of rock and roll movies, this is a very mediocre one. It's no Spinal Tap or Almost Famous or anything like that. It really is just okay. It's also worth noting that one of the co-stars of the movie is Dominic West, who played Jimmy in The Wire, one of the, of course, greatest television programs of all time. He's in this as one of the guys in the band, so you get to see Jimmy walking around with a big 80s hair metal wig. Like I say, the movie is watchable, so I'm going to give it 2.5 stars. Now, Murder at 1600. This is a movie that I remember when it came out. I remember seeing the commercials for it. The idea is there's been a murder in the White House, and Wesley Snipes is the Washington, D.C. detective who's got to figure out what happened. I remember being fascinated by that premise as a kid, and I never saw it. I finally got around to it, and here's the thing. I've been revisiting a lot of these sort of 90s thrillers and finding some real gems. Murder at 1600 is fine. It's fine. Snipes is good. Alan Alda is also good. Probably the standout for me somewhat is Diane Lane as the FBI agent who initially thinks that the conspiracy that Snipes uncovers is baloney, but then comes around to Snipes' side. She's pretty good. I like Diane Lane a lot. If anything, I sort of wish hers and Snipes' roles were reversed. I think that would have been a more interesting dynamic and could have given both of them more to do. But Snipes is the cop and her is the doubting FBI agent. It's kind of by the numbers, which is the thing with this movie. Is yes, it's a movie with like twists and things in it, but it's very much like other 90s thrillers. It just feels very rote, which isn't to say it doesn't have its pleasures. It does. It just never really rises above being middle of the road, which is why I'm giving Murder at 1600 2.5 stars. Now it's time for a brand new segment on the show. This is Docu-Rama. Docu-Rama is where we're going to be looking at documentaries, and I am pleased to inaugurate this new segment with a movie called David Bowie, The Last 5 Years. I'm sure that you were as surprised as all of us here at Every Movie Ever by the unexpected passing of David Bowie last year. Now, I am a big-time Bowie fan. I love me some David Bowie, and I certainly felt his passing. Now, one of the things that so obviously Bowie's music and his whole persona is the reason we all love David. But a big part of what captivates him to me is the stuff that we don't see. A thing I like about David Bowie is to sit back and think about what was it like to be David Bowie on a daily basis? On just like a lazy Sunday afternoon, what did he and Iman get up to? These are the kind of things I like to wonder about. And this documentary, which follows the last 5 years of Bowie's life as he records his last album, Black Star, and records a series of music videos, and seems to really be coming to the terms with the idea of passing away. It's very moving. It's very reminiscent of a similar documentary about the last year of the life of Warren Zevon. But one of the things that I found most valuable about this movie is it does offer the barest and briefest of glimpses into that day-to-day David Bowie. You see, the early part of this movie features a lot of behind-the-scenes footage from Bowie's last tour. And there is very early on, it's very little, it's just a couple of minutes of David Bowie wandering around some Midwestern truck stop, looking at cassette tape racks and things, and at one point getting very invested with one of his bandmates in trying to win a claw machine. And the image of David Bowie trying to play that skill crane and win that teddy bear or whatever, it's all I've ever wanted to see in my life. I wish there had been more of that kind of thing in this movie. I wish that the movie had been able to be more personal. As it is very interesting. It tends to focus more on interviews with Bowie's collaborators from his final years. There aren't interviews with Bowie's son or with Iman or really with people from his inner circle. But what we do get is a very interesting portrait into, if not Bowie's personal life, which is a thing that I'm not sure we'll ever really see a ton of because he didn't want us to, certainly into his creative life. If you are at all a fan of Bowie's, this is a documentary worth checking out. I'm going to give it 3.5 stars. All right, let's head over to MST A to Z. Tonight we're going to look at The Brain That Wouldn't Die. This is, of course, our segment where we're looking at every Mystery Science Theater 3000 movie in alphabetical order. Brain That Wouldn't Die is next up on the slate. This is a sort of iconic 50s B movie. This is the one where a scientist and his girlfriend are like in a car accident, and he amputates her head and keeps it alive in a baking pan with some sort of weird science juice. And let me tell you something, that iconography is huge. I mean, that's a very memorable image of this head still alive. And it's interesting where the movie takes that, in that the head is very bitter about having been brought back to life. And I think that's interesting. Unfortunately, the rest of the movie can't keep up with that. This is a pretty low-budget movie. And instead of it focusing on, just sort of a lot of running around and hanging out in the lab, which is what a lot of these sort of low-budget sci-fi movies would do, this one gets real gross and sleazy real quick. A lot of the plot ends up revolving around the scientist, who is a creepy guy, heading out to try and find a new body for his fiance's head. Which means he's going to a lot of 50s type strip clubs and stuff, and it's not great. There's a lot of weird leering at women footage. There's just a lot of creepiness in this that makes it a very unpleasant watch. I can only give The Brain That Wouldn't Die 1 star. All right, we haven't been there in a little while, so let's head over to the Christmas corner. Today we're looking at another one of those Hallmark Christmas movies. This one is called Christmas in Evergreen. And it's a movie about a woman who, a sort of quirky or eccentric character. She lives in a small town in New England called Evergreen. And Evergreen throws an annual town Christmas festival that is put in jeopardy, I don't know, because of a blizzard or something like that. And she is trying to make it happen, while also trying to learn things about herself as she feels a draw to move to a big city, and has to learn that, no, it's the small town she really loves. Meanwhile, there is a dude and his daughter who are just passing through the town, and they've been stranded because of the blizzard, and they have to find out that they also like the small town, and also that the guy is in love with the girl. It's pretty average fare, maybe slightly above average. It's elevated a little bit by Ashley Williams, who plays the main character, and she's a fun performer. If you've ever seen the Jim Gaffigan show, she plays Gaffigan's wife on that program, and she's a pretty fun presence in this. The movie is brought down somewhat by the whole storyline involving the stranded guy. His daughter's all right, but that whole storyline doesn't really work for me, in part because the guy is played by Teddy Sears, who played the bad guy on Flash for a season and is not, to my mind, a very electric or interesting performer. To be honest with you, this is a movie that would probably actually be a real clunker were it not for Ashley Williams, but even her game attitude, for me, is only going to bring Christmas at an Evergreen up to 2 stars. Folks, you know I like a spooky movie, which means it's time for Calling All Horror Hounds. Hello, Horror Hounds. We're back this week with this week's horror movie. In this case, Resident Evil, The Final Chapter. Resident Evil is, of course, the film series that it was based somewhat loosely on the Resident Evil video games. It is a series of, 5, 6, maybe 7 movies at this point that seem to just keep coming out. I'm not really sure who is going to see them. I've seen several of them, but not all of them. Apparently they make enough money to keep going. This one's billed as the final chapter, but of course, entertainingly ends in such a way as to suggest yet another Resident Evil movie. These things all star Mia Jovovich as a, series of clones who get into a series of, acrobatic butt-kicking action. This movie, I've seen several of these. Some of them I thought are okay, some of them I haven't liked. I would say that the final chapter is probably the best of them. It is big, goofy fun, and what I really appreciate about it is that it's very fast moving. This is a movie that doesn't spend a lot of time sitting around and navel-gazing or telling you too much about the complex mythology of the Resident Evil franchise. It's just action scene after action scene after action scene, buttressed by a truly Marx Brothers level of plot, by which I mean if you watch those old Marx Brothers movies, typically it's just joke, 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 and there's some lip service provided to there being a plot, but really there isn't much of one. Now that said, the movie does occasionally get involved in some ponderous exposition, and the plot that's there is completely inscrutable. I have absolutely no idea what happened in this movie. What I can tell you is that the constant stream of Mia killing zombies and fighting dudes was entertaining enough to give Resident Evil: The Final Chapter 2.5 stars. Looks like we have just enough time for a Hollywood classic. This week, let's take a look at The Mad Magician. Now, this is a Vincent Price starring B-movie, and I love Vincent Price. Anytime that you've got a movie that he's the star of, that's going to be worth watching. And there are not a ton of sort of these, sort of black and white solo Price starring movies, and so this one is fun. It has a great period look as it's set in Victorian England, I think. I honestly can't remember if it's New York or London. I'm pretty sure it's London, though. Yeah. Where Vincent Price plays a guy who makes the illusions for magicians and who wants to be a magician himself, but finds himself stymied by, big magic, by the guy who owns the company that Vincent Price works for, and by prominent magicians. And so Vincent Price, being Vincent Price, he decides he's going to murder all of those guys. And then he uses his makeup techniques to disguise himself as those guys to make it seem like they're not dead and to put the scent, as such as it is, off of him. It's a pretty fun movie. It's pretty fast-paced. The masks and makeup are fun, as are the illusions, and of course Price himself is always great. I was lucky enough to see this movie a few weeks ago on Svengoolie, which is over on MeTV. Svengoolie is one of the last horror movie hosts. I'm a big fan of those older horror movie host shows that used to be all over the country. Tons of great regional hosts like Svengoolie. Joe Bob Briggs is another huge one for me, who was sort of a national cable guy like Svengoolie is now. But you also had like Zacherle. Elvira was like that for California before she went national. Tons of great guys. Svengoolie is the guy for Chicago, but because of MeTV is now on nationally. And growing up in the vicinity of Chicago, I used to watch a lot of Svengoolie, and I was thrilled when he came national. Now, a problem I've had not to criticize Sven too much with the show lately, is that because he's on MeTV and because it's national, lately he's been doing, well, lately, ever since MeTV went national, he's been doing a lot of movies from the Universal Vault. That's just kind of the deal, I think, that they have. Which means it's a lot of the Universal Frankenstein sequels and the Mummy sequels and the Dracula sequels. And the problem with those movies is there's a very sameness to them. Like when you watch them week after week, it gets a little bit boring. And so I've been delighted that lately he's been able to break out of that box a little bit with stuff like The Mad Magician, which while I think is still owned by Universal, is at least not quite the same mold as those very specific Universal monster movies of the 30s and 40s. So this was a ton of fun. I liked it a lot. I'm going to give it 3.5 stars. Well, it's time for nobody's favorite part of the show. This is the worst of the week. This week's worst of the week is The Great Wall. This is a movie that came out last year, sort of a big summer action tentpole period piece about the, I guess, early days of the Great Wall of China and how it had been built to stop demons from invading China. The thing stars Matt Damon in an attempt to appeal to American and Chinese audiences. And yeah, I mean, this is at the end of the day a real cynical attempt to create a movie that would be a big hit in those two regions, and it really doesn't work. The cast is largely unmemorable. The best thing I can say about the movie is I like the Crane Warriors, which is a group of women in armor who use like Cirque du Soleil type wire harnesses to jump off of the Great Wall and then like spear demons and then bounce back up. And they're sort of fun. But the rest of the movie was, to be honest with you, just completely incapable of holding my attention. Its plot about how they're going to stop these mindless demons is boring at best. There's, some weird backstabbing and things going on. No one in it is particularly electric. None of it is particularly interesting, which is why The Great Wall to me is only worth 1.5 stars. As always, it's time to jump from the worst to the best. This is the best of the bunch. So we're following up with the commercial and critical disaster that was The Great Wall with The Disaster Artist. Oh, you see what I did there? So this picture, if you haven't seen or heard of it, it's a little bit smaller of a movie, sort of an independent comedy, directed by and starring James Franco, who is, let's be honest, a little bit of a problematic figure right now, but did make a really good movie. So this is the story of the making of The Room. And if you're not familiar with The Room is sort of our current bad movie du jour. It's one of those, terrible movies that is so bad it's good and fun to watch and has created quite a bit of a cult following at midnight showings around the country. In this case, The Room, it was directed by a guy named Tommy Wiseau, who also wrote it and stars in it. And it's a real weird movie that is about Tommy's character, who is this sort of great and blameless dude whose girlfriend cheats on him and he can't figure out why and all of this. It's difficult for me to explain to you the subtle terribleness and wonderfulness of The Room, except to say that you should probably see it. And if you're not going to see it, you should watch The Disaster Artist, which tells the true, if baffling story of the making of that movie, which is, if anything, only weirder than the movie itself. That story largely is about Tommy Wiseau, a guy who is clearly not American, but who will not say where he's from, and no one has any idea. He's also a guy with seemingly unlimited financial resources who will not reveal where they are come from, who seems to think he's a sort of an Orson Welles, and who has an unhealthy fixation on his roommate, played by Dave Franco. James Franco is playing Tommy, but his roommate, played by Dave Franco, and who wants him to co-star in this movie, and all of the weird disasters that happen, particularly as Tommy very quickly reveals he has no idea how to direct a movie, but insists on complete control. Now, this movie, outside of the two Franco stars, absolutely anyone who's anyone in the world of alternative comedy. So you have people like Paul Scheer and Jason Mantzoukas and June Diane Raphael in small parts. Seth Rogen has a fairly substantial part in this movie, as does Alison Brie from Community and Glow has a pretty big part in the movie. It's a really fun, absolutely engrossing movie featuring a ton of just pitch-perfect performances, anchored in particular by James Franco, who has the very difficult job of playing Tommy Wiseau. Wiseau is such an eccentric and specific character with such a specifically odd voice and accent that it would be extremely easy for this to fall into an impersonation. And certainly anybody who has seen The Room has a Tommy Wiseau impersonation. For example, here is mine. Oh, hi, Lisa. Oh, hi, Mark. Yes, I'm Tommy. Oh, right? It'd be very easy for the movie to become that. But Franco imbues Tommy with real humanity and plays the role in such a way that really suggests at, the sort of weird depths and mysteries and the emotional life of him without spending a lot of time speculating on what all of that may in fact be. It really, really is a terrific movie. I don't think you need to have seen The Room to see and enjoy The Disaster Artist, but like I say, it's a movie that is more than worth watching all on its own, and I'm giving it 4 big stars. All right, folks, that is going to do it for this episode of Every Movie Ever. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back next week as we keep trying to review every movie ever made.